So for today's class, what I'm really focusing on is the development of the jazz ride pattern, and how that developed from kind of the early stages of what it was back in the 19 teens to uh, today. We're going to go basically through the 60s, because that's where I've seen the major innovations in the groove. Um, so we all kind of know this jazz ride pattern that we've kind of heard 1,000 times, right? Ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding. And, people make jokes about it like, oh, it's just jazz, like, like it's become a butt of jokes in a lot of ways. Um, but it has a real rich kind of tradition of where it comes from. And the development of it is really actually quite interesting and parallels a lot of also the development of the drum set and how it became what it was in modern times. So what we're going to kind of do today is I'm going to just kind of take you through a bunch of these developments. We're going to listen to some examples and some music of stuff and talk about stuff. So we are going to start in 1917, and this is the original Dixieland Jazz Band. And we're starting here because this is the first recorded jazz band that we know of. One note I do want to kind of make about that is they are the first recorded jazz band primarily because they were white musicians. And that's something that, we have to kind of take in mind when we're listening and thinking about this stuff in a historical sense, because this music was happening before this first recording happened. And so it's not like this recording happened and then jazz existed, but things were happening around here. But what I want you to really kind of focus on in this piece is about halfway through, you're going to start hearing some kind of wood blocks and stuff like that. And so very commonly in these early jazz recordings, the drummer would use stuff like wood blocks. And the reason for that was because recording technology was actually not super great at the time. They just had one microphone in a room, and the microphone couldn't really pick up low frequencies all that well. And so in order for a drummer to be heard or for their playing to cut through, they had to use high-pitched stuff like wood blocks rather than the usual snare drum stuff that they would probably be doing in a live context. So this is the original Dixieland Jazz Band. All right, that's an original Dixieland Jazz Band. So as you heard, you could actually even hear some of the snare drum at the beginning a little bit. And so this is all happening kind of in New Orleans at this time. And um, the tradition had been in these marching bands, in these second line groups, you would have a whole section of drummers, right? You'd have a snare drum player, you'd have a bass drum player, and you'd have someone who was playing crash cymbals, like you would in any marching band nowadays too. Um, but economically, when these dance bands started coming, people didn't want to have to pay for an entire band to come. So they would say, "Hey, can you bring your bass drum and your snare drum and maybe like a sock cymbal or something like that, and just kind of play what we would in this context." So that's kind of what you're hearing at that time. I'm going to show a couple pictures actually. This is this picture right here. This is like what you would see maybe as a typical drum set during that period. So you see bass drum, snare drum, wood block. There's a China cymbal at the top, usually used for effects, just like tsh. And then there's a little what they call a sock cymbal down at the bottom there, where the drummer would just with their pedal, they would kind of just kick that. So we don't see hi-hat, we don't see ride cymbal, we don't see a lot of the things that we commonly associate with modern drum sets at this period of time. Here's kind of another in-picture view of it. So you see kind of another version of this on the bottom right. That's what they call a lowboy cymbal. That's the predecessor to what we call the hi-hat. And so that you would just kind of splash that with your foot just to kind of get the effect of a splash sound. And actually, just one more. This is probably more of what we just heard with all these different wood blocks kind of here and kind of the trap set kind of going on here. So that's what you would typically see at that period of time for a drum set. So the next thing that we are going to listen to, we're sticking in New Orleans for a while, and there was a pianist, and his name was Fate Marable. And Fate Marable was well known for being on the steamships. He was a band leader on the steamships, and why I bring him up is because he is the person that kind of trains a lot of the musicians that we end up actually really knowing about later. People like Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and the two drummers that I'm going to start talking about next, which are Warren Baby Dodds and Zutty Singleton. And they're pretty much at the forefront of creating these new beats and kind of learning where this all goes. So this is actually Zutty Singleton on this track, and you still hear kind of just the marching kind of place that they're coming from, but it's starting to kind of make its way into some other realms. So this is Frankie and Johnny. Right, that's Fate Marable. And yeah, this is one of two songs that he ever recorded. I think this was recorded in 1924. And yeah, you hear like when it hits the bridge a little bit later, back to the woodblocks, right? This is something that was employed frequently by drummers at this time because you couldn't really hear the snare drum that was happening during the A sections all that much. So I brought up these two drummers, Zutty Singleton and Baby Dodds, and we're going to focus on Baby Dodds because he was probably the first big major drummer that that comes out in jazz music. And Baby Dodds was, like I said, he was a product of Fate Marable's group, and really kind of developed some stuff. He was, what this example I'm going to show you right now was, he recorded an album of just solo drum and some talking. And so this track that we're going to listen to now is just him playing essentially what would be marching snare drum stuff during that time period. So as we can't hear the snare drums in these pieces because of the rest of the band, this is a great document because it really shows what it would sound like just from a drummer's perspective. So here's him just playing kind of some marching stuff that you would hear in that time period. So you can really imagine actually kind of what was happening in those last couple tracks that we listened to from the drummer's perspective, in maybe more of a live context that, you know, we're not able to have that fortune of hearing because of recording technology during that time. So from this same album, he has another track, and this is on what he calls the shimmy beat. And the shimmy beat is kind of his big development to the jazz ride pattern. So up until then, there's a lot of marching stuff, and we have kind of the da-ka-da-ka-da-ka-da swing eighth notes on the wood blocks and stuff like that. But what Baby Dodds does is he simplifies this beat in a way, and turns it into kind of this more sort of thing that you're going to hear in this next clip here. And this is kind of what I see as kind of the foundation of what ends up becoming our dink-dink-dink ride pattern in a way. So here we go. This is the shimmy beat. And he actually talks about it a little bit during this. So it's kind of fascinating to hear some of the things that he has to say. All right. So in that, you actually hear him talking about and calling out some drummers like Gene Krupa, who use it as a quarter beat, is what he says is what they say it is, and he calls it a triple beat. And so what that means is the basis of the roll rhythm is going to be more triplet based. So the way he's doing it is at its core structure is dut dugga da dut dugga da dut dugga da dut dugga da dut. Whereas he's saying people like Gene Krupa and other people like that are playing more dut da 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 da, more eighth note based sort of stuff. And so this is his development here. And so to me, this is where I see really that connection to that swing beat, is if you just take that middle triplet out, the dut da 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 da, you get right there to the swing pattern. And using that as a consistent pattern rather than when we heard the earlier tracks with the swung eighth notes is like there's a little bit more variant in it, and he's basically stating this as like this is kind of a core beat that we're going to listen to. So I am just going to share one more example of Baby Dodds, and this is a trio record that he did later in his life. And so this actually gives a great example of how he would play the shimmy beat within the context of a band, and then how he would kind of go off and do stuff with woodblocks and different stuff like that too. So one more from the great Baby Dodds. But yeah, so you really start seeing like this sense of swing that's really happening, that's not necessarily just a march anymore. And that's really the development that he kind of brings to the drums. So we're going to kind of now move towards the 1930s. So that was about the 1920s where all that's happening. 1930s, you have the swing era that kind of starts happening. And the big drummer that I see that made the biggest developments during this period is a drummer named Joe Jones, known as Papa Joe Jones, not Philly Joe Jones, who was a later drummer in the bebop era, but Papa Joe Jones, who was Count Basie's drummer for a long time, played with Lester Young, and was one of the most revolutionary figures on the drum set. So what Joe Jones did is I was talking about this idea of lowboy hi-hats and sock cymbals earlier. He was kind of at the forefront of when the hi-hat actually got raised up to the level that we all have it kind of at face level now. And so he kind of made the decision to start putting our sense of time away from the snare drum, and now he's putting it higher on the cymbal, on the hi-hat cymbal. And so now that pattern, that da 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 da, is now finding its way onto the hi-hat. Sometimes opened, sometimes not. But that's one of the major evolutions that he has. The other major thing that he is a part of is the use of brushes in jazz context. So around this period, from some of the research I was doing, I found some patents around the 1920s for fly swatters. And fly swatters were kind of what we know as modern jazz brushes now. It was just a stick with a bunch of like metal thimbles kind of coming off of it. So not what we know as fly swatters now, but these drummers like Joe Jones and a lot of other people during this time period saw these, and people were asking them like, hey, you got to play quiet in this context. And so they just said, well, I can play all my rudiments, I can do all my things with these fly swatters. Let's see how we can use them. So Joe Jones was a major innovator during this time period, and for a lot of people, they consider him the father of the modern drum set. And I am going to share, what am I going to share next? A trio recording that he did a little bit later in his life, but actually, no, sorry. I'm going to start with a recording of Count Basie's orchestra that he's playing in, where you start to hear, if you listen hard enough, you'll hear the hi-hat being used. All right, so that you're starting to hear the use of the hi-hat come into a lot more play there. And this next track that I'm going to show you is a trio album that he did, and to me, this really shows his range a lot. You're going to hear at the beginning he's playing the jazz ride pattern on his snare drum. Then he goes to his brushes playing, which is just magnificent, and he plays some hi-hat stuff. And the only time he uses cymbals are for effects at the very end of the song. And so this was very typical. Like, cymbals are not used as the way that we are going to use them all that much up until this point yet. So here's another track of his. Right, there's Joe Jones for you. Just like some of the most swinging stuff ever. Yeah, his feel was just magnificent. You start hearing in that, he starts to use his hi-hat with his left foot a little bit more, and uses it kind of as more of a color, bringing colors into the drums. But what's fascinating about him is just how he uses all the parts of the drum set to just create color, and to, and this is before even going to the ride cymbal. You don't miss it at all, one bit. So this is the swing era. So during this time period, you have people like Gene Krupa, Chick Webb. Some of these are the major drummers of the time period. And what ends up happening is one major development that happens is the Zildjian Cymbal Company. They had come to the United States in the mid-20s about, and by around the 30s, they're trying to figure out how they can sell their product the best. So they're talking to drummers like Joe Jones and Gene Krupa, and Gene Krupa had, I think, the closest relationship with the Zildjian Company, and what Gene Krupa started telling them was like, hey, we need some thinner cymbals than are being made right now, and maybe start thinking about having them be bigger, so that we can use our cymbals more as not just like a quick effect or anything like that, but that we can use it, we can accent on them more and different stuff like that. So Gene is kind of at the forefront of the cymbal development, and this also happens to coincide right along with the start of bebop, and the movement that people like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie are a part of. The drummer that we talk about when we talk about bebop music, and kind of the great innovator of the drum set for bebop music, is Kenny Clark. And Kenny Clark, he was a magnificent drummer. And he was playing in, I have it right here, he played in Teddy Hill's band with Dizzy Gillespie. And they were playing at Mitten's Playhouse, and were kind of the house band. And that's where things really developed for them. And so both Dizzy Gillespie and Kenny Clark would get together and just play sessions with each other. And what Kenny Clark wanted to do, he wanted to have a little bit more freedom with how to play. He wanted to be able to accent with the trumpets. He didn't want to be locked into this dink dink da dink dink da dink the entire time. He wanted some more freedom. And so the story that I heard was that he was playing all this stuff and wanted to do some stuff with his left hand on the snare drum, but your hands are crossed like that when you're playing hi-hat and snare drum. And so he just kind of said, well, what happens if I go to this cymbal up here? And starts, that's where kind of this evolution starts happening. And he kind of comes in with this more syncopated feel of stuff. So I'm going to show you a nice live example of his, and you're going to see how the drummer's no longer thinking just quarter note based. Especially, we call it 4 on the floor with our bass drum, which is doom 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 to maintain the groove. He's no longer thinking just that. He's thinking he's thinking about a bigger picture of things. And this live thing is a great example. So. All right, Kenny Clark. So what you see here is there's now more interaction between the drummer and the rest of the group, and this is the big shift that's happening in the music. This is when jazz becomes a little bit more of an art music, and not as much of a dance music. You know, you start losing some of the fans, but the musicians are becoming a little bit more involved. They're you know, the conversation between the drummer and the saxophone player and the pianist and the bass player, it's getting deeper and deeper. And this is what really happens during this bebop period. Um, uh, Many of the other kind of innovators during this time are people like Max Roach, Philly Joe Jones, Art Taylor. Um, but Kenny Clark is really the one in terms of the ride cymbal pattern and shifting the ride cymbal pattern that I think we look to in making that huge shift there. So so I'm gonna kind of just go a little bit further. Now we're gonna, you know, that's the 40s there. The 50s we kind of see the emergence of hard bop music and people like Philly Joe Jones and different stuff like that. But there's not any huge changes to structurally to what's happening with our ride cymbal and how that groove is being made. So we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit through that, even though so many drummers in there are so influential and amazing. And we're going to kind of fast forward to what I'm kind of considering post-bop, post-modern stuff. And the first drummer that I want to really highlight in this is Roy Haynes. We're very fortunate. Roy Haynes is like 95 years old and he's still with us, and he's still playing and sounding amazing and able to share this music, which is just fabulous. But Roy, you actually even hear as early as 1956, 1957 in some of his stuff with Thelonious Monk, he's starting to play around with the idea of utilizing the hi-hat as more of a comping voice rather than just 2 and 4 the whole time, right? Because that's what we're hearing up until then, even with people like Kenny Clark, is still just that hi-hat is maintaining the time feel. And Roy Haynes starts kind of exploring a little bit more, like how can I use this as a comping voice and bring more stuff in there. So the example I am going to share is actually a little bit of a later example of his, but it really shows how he fully developed this, and it's I think very fitting for today because it's a Chick Corea track who we unfortunately lost today. off of the album Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, but uh, uh, Chick Corea just sounds masterful on this. So here we go. All right, that's the great Roy Haynes, the great Chick Corea. That album's classic. Do yourself a favor and just listen to that tonight, just 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 for Chick, since he passed away today. Um, but yeah, I mean, you really, that's such a great example of now the drummer is utilizing all four limbs as voices rather than having to keep the groove the entire time with something. And it's just very masterful how Roy Haynes does it. Um, and to me, he's one of the first people that starts messing around with that idea a bit. Um, we also, during this time period, I mean, there's so many great drummers that are now pushing the boundaries of what how the instruments played, how we're approaching the swing pattern, and none other than Elvin Jones, the great Elvin Jones, who was the drummer with the John Coltrane Quartet, and then went on to lead a bunch of amazing groups of his own. Um, Elvin brings a very African sensibility to what he's doing, and not necessarily in a direct way, but in more of a just he's utilizing the idea of threes and fours existing kind of at the same time, dotted quarter notes, this kind of polyrhythmic approach to drumming that a lot of people aren't really doing, and his use of the triplet in his comping and in his soloing is no one had quite used this idea of a triplet to the extent that he starts doing it, and so he really kind of opens up and rounds out the ride cymbal beat in a lot of ways, where as we're thinking about it very uh, almost eighth note based, with all the other stuff, but with Elvin Jones we start thinking about it triplet based. And so here's a great video of him with the Coltrane Quartet. All right, sorry to stop that. I know it's so good. Okay, so now I'm we're gonna shift one more time, and this is what I kind of see as the last major shift in the ride cymbal pattern. And um, what this shift actually, what it is the absence of a strict metronomic time. So we have, to me, the person I see as kind of the forefront of this is Sonny Murray. Now, Sonny Murray was Cecil Taylor's drummer, Albert Ayler's drummer for a bunch of years, and I mean, even you listen to some of Cecil Taylor's very early stuff, and he swings harder than anybody that you would ever know. But then as kind of things shift and it becomes even more of an art music, and people are kind of just losing this idea of time, Sonny Murray comes and along with Cecil Taylor and Albert Ayler and some of these musicians around this time, you hear kind of the later John Coltrane stuff with Rashid Ali is kind of another example of people kind of messing with, probably the most popular example of that. Um, but Sonny Murray, he's kind of the person that really kind of introduces this to the concept of playing the drum set. And so we're going to listen to a piece of his with, I believe, Albert Ayler, great saxophone player Albert Ayler. And it's, everything's changing in the music. So, this possibly could not be some people's cup of tea, but bear with it. All right, Sonny Murray with Albert Ayler. Also, that's the great Gary Peacock on bass, who you might all know from the Keith Jarrett trio. So that's where he's getting his start too, and that's not what we know him for these days. But you kind of see where people are kind of forming stuff. So I'm going to show one last one, but the reason I showed Sonny Murray, even though it's not necessarily a development to the ding ding a ding kind of pattern, what what that evolution does is it inspires drummers like Tony Williams, Paul Motion, um, people like that that start now taking the jazz ride cymbal and playing in very textural ways. So I'm just going to kind of finish up with one last, and this is Tony Williams with the Miles Davis Quintet, playing in a very textural way. So yeah, great Tony Williams with the Miles Davis quintet there. And one other note I'll say about his development to the jazz ride thing is he's the first one that starts utilizing his hi hat on all four beats. So whereas Roy Haynes was saying like let's get rid of the hi hat, Tony Williams is playing a lot of times with his left foot, and what that allows him to do is he keeps that going, but it frees up the rest of his body to be able to make other decisions with what he's doing and play in a more textural way. So I know it's like 50, 60 years of stuff that we kind of just blaze through right there. But if anyone has any thoughts or questions or anything like that, I'd love to kind of open it up at this moment. Oh my God, is that Alex?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh my God. I mean, you're living in New Orleans right now, right?
Oh yeah, yep.
So like from your perspective, because you're around people who are probably still engaging with some of these earlier traditions of what's happening in with the groove of jazz. What uh, was yeah? What are some of your observations? I guess on that.
Well, man, I mean, yeah, that's the whole march to swing, evolution. There definitely a few of the songs that you were playing before that I play pretty frequently in New Orleans, kind of like Frankie and Johnny and all
Hmm.
those. We don't play it exactly that way, but still, it's like definitely something that we like would be playing if there weren't a pandemic going on, kind of thing.
Right.
But I was wondering too, like how do you factor Ed Blackwell into the whole thing?
So yeah, so what I was what I was kind of getting into today was really just the development of the jazz ride cymbal pattern. So for any of you that want to come back next week or the week after, next week what I'm doing a whole thing on the intersectionality between African music and jazz. And so that's going to talk about a little bit more of those innovations of people like Ed Blackwell who are using African music, Art Blakey, Sonny Murray again because
Especially.
he's using a lot of that stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, the hardest thing about putting this together was that in some form or another, there's so many people that were innovative and did great things, and so I felt like today I was just focusing on some major shifts that happened in the ride cymbal pattern. But I mean, Ed Blackwell is he's the man. So yeah, anyone else?
Um, I had a question.
Yeah.
Do you think innovation is more just a matter of like, I don't, what do you think it's a matter of like people getting bored or like they just want to try something new? Because like it seems like innately like all these guys could have done a lot of this stuff like earlier because they're, what did you say, like they're good musicians?
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers to that. So one of the answers, and I probably went through this really fast, but was the development of the drum set and people when the hi hat was down low, people weren't thinking about that being used as a timekeeper. Once someone developed that to be a little bit higher, then people said, "Oh, there's this thing here. What else can I do with it?" Um, so I think that's one way that you start seeing that happen. Like I said, Gene Krupa was really instrumental in the creation of thinner cymbals that were thinner and larger cymbals that people were able to accent on a little bit more, and that kind of gave way to bebop and bringing this emphasis of time from the hi hat all the way up to the ride cymbal. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that people are always just pushing to create something new. You learn from the people before you, and you're doing, you have your teachers, you have all those people, but you're also engaged in listening to maybe more modern music than your teachers were. Um, and so therefore the ideas are kind of expanding in that way. And I think I don't know if I really addressed this at the beginning, but I think um, none of this stuff happened in a vacuum. So when I say that like someone like Kenny Clark totally revolutionized the way we play, or Joe Jones, or Baby Dodds, it's not like they just like woke up one day and said like, oh man, I got this idea, I'm gonna do it. But they were hanging out with friends, they were playing gigs with other people, um, and they were sharing ideas with each other. And so these innovations happen somewhat gradually, and it just happens that one person makes enough of a step to be considered the innovator in it. But these innovations are actually more innovations of a community than one person, I think. Anyone else?
I'm kind of imagining that really a lot of the innovations too probably took place in those late night jam sessions that happened all over the country, but especially in New York, lofts and things like that. That it was those, 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. sessions that, where people were really trying so much, trying new things, and then they would then bring that into the regular, gigs and stuff that they were playing. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I actually am bummed because I missed. There was an interview with Kenny Clark that I was going to play, but I was kind of trying to get things on time, and he's really talking about that, about him and how him and Dizzy Gillespie would just get together and away from the bandstand would just kind of like say like, hey man, can I look at your trumpet part right now, and I want to be able to play the figures on your trumpet part. And that's how they would start developing that stuff together, is just not necessarily developments that would happen on the bandstand, because if they happen on the bandstand they get fired, but stuff that they would do after hours with each other.
Interesting about the development of like trying new things. There was CCJ. We had the great Antonio Sanchez on for an interview on Sunday, and he was talking about one of the things that he's been working with recording is the sound of different drum sets, but putting them together. So he's layering like 3 different drum sets recorded in 3 different rooms, but putting it together to create like a new sound, So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, well, and like just relating that to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, I mean, that's essentially how the drum set was formed, is that you had these marching bands, and there was the snare part, there was the bass drum part, there was the cymbal part, and someone just said, for economical reasons or whatever, like, hey, can you do all this stuff right now? Like, and so then, they had to sit down and say, okay, foot, hands, how do I put this together? And that's, a lot of how this, how the development of the drum set and the development of our grooves, have kind of come about. So.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Trevor.
Thank you all so much for being here. This was really a pleasure for me, and great to have all of you here.